Harry Morgan was born in Detroit as Harry Bratsburg, though you'll also see it spelled Brasburg, Bratsburg, or occasionally Henry Bratsburg. Even that morsel of genealogical confusion hints at the kind of unassuming humility that eventually became his calling card. Morgan was never the sort of Hollywood showman who changed his name in a brazen attempt to glitz it up. No, he adjusted it over time, less out of ego and more out of necessity. He was the son of Hannah and Henry Bratsburg, both of them the product of Swedish and Norwegian ancestry. Growing up, the young Harry would carry those hearty Midwestern values into every role he tackled, usually adding a touch of that folksy warmth that would become his signature. Though Harry was born in Detroit, he spent much of his formative years in Muskegon, Michigan. Small-town living might seem worlds away from the glittering dreams of Hollywood, but these early experiences gave him the determination and humility that set him apart from the typical rising star. He graduated from Muskegon High School in 1933, and believe it or not, one of his earliest achievements was as a statewide debating champion. Imagine a young Harry, perhaps not yet certain of his future path, testing his rhetorical prowess in debate competitions, learning to shape arguments with clarity and confidence. That skill with words, that ability to make people listen closely, would become as important to his acting as the lines in any script he later performed. Initially, Harry had the idea to pursue a legal career, but as you might suspect, the bright lights of performance beckoned when he was just a junior at the University of Chicago. Acting took root in his life, and that moment of discovery wasn't just a casual fling. It was a calling that would define him for decades. By 1937, Harry Morgan was officially treading the boards, heading for New York City's group theater. If you're not super familiar with the group theater, let's just say it was a crucible for some of the greatest acting talents America ever saw. Folks like Lee J. Cobb, Elia Kazan, John Garfield, Carl Malden, names that would influence everything from method acting to the shape of modern theater itself. The group theater was co-founded by Harold Klorman, Cheryl Crawford, and Lee Strasberg, and they had a knack for forging strong creative bonds among their members. That environment, pulsating with progressive ideas and a hunger for raw, authentic storytelling, shaped Morgan's approach to acting. He wasn't just memorizing lines, he was learning to embody characters from the inside out, a skill that later made him so real, so grounded, so distinctly human on screen. Not to mention, he found himself cast in Clifford Odets's original production of Golden Boy, a hallmark of mid-20th century theater. When he wasn't commanding the stage in New York, he would join summer stock at Pine Brook Country Club in Nichols, Connecticut, continuing to hone his chops with a variety of roles and an ever-deepening portfolio of acting experiences. Amid these rising career ambitions, 1940 rolled around, and with it came Harry Morgan's first marriage to Eileen Dechon, a bond that would last until her death in 1985. That's 45 years, folks. A Hollywood marriage of that duration is practically mythic. Think about that for a moment. His star was ascending. The demands on his schedule were intense, yet that partnership endured, anchored by their growing family. Together, Harry and Eileen had 4 sons, Christopher, Charles, Paul, and Daniel. Their family life often bled into Harry's on-screen world, too, most famously when a photograph of Eileen would regularly appear on Colonel Potter's desk during MASH. Imagine fans poring over every detail of that set, never realizing that the woman in the photo was, in fact, Harry Morgan's real-life love. His grandson Jeremy even contributed a drawing of a horse that hung behind Potter's desk on that iconic show. And if you were eagle-eyed watching Dragnet, you may have caught Harry's character, Bill Gannon, referencing a wife named Eileen, Another subtle tribute. Sometimes the best on-screen details come from real life, and in Harry Morgan's case, those personal Easter eggs served as a constant thread weaving through his performances. But let's rewind just a bit to 1942, when Harry Morgan officially stepped before the cameras in a little movie called To the Shores of Tripoli. At that point, he was credited as Henry Morgan, or even Harry Morgan. Why the shift? It turned out there was already a popular humorist named Henry Morgan. The confusion might have overshadowed his fledgling career if he didn't find a way to stand out. To keep his identity clear, he leaned more fully into Harry Morgan, and that's how he stuck in the cultural memory. But To the Shores of Tripoli wasn't the only reason. 1942 was a big year for him. That same year, he showed up in Orchestra Wives, a film featuring the legendary bandleader Glenn Miller. Now picture a room vibrating with the sweet, brassy big band sound. In the midst of that swirl of trumpets, saxophones, and swirling couples, there's a young Harry Morgan pushing his way to the front with his on-screen date, keen to soak in the glory of Glenn Miller's music. It was short but memorable, and from that fateful set, a real-life friendship blossomed between Morgan and Miller. They bonded closely, only for that bond to take a tragic turn when Glenn Miller famously disappeared in 1944. Many years later, Harry Morgan got to honor that friendship by appearing in The Glenn Miller Story, 1954, playing Chummy McGregor and reminding audiences of a friend he had lost far too soon. In a swift burst of early career momentum, Morgan took on a spectrum of film roles throughout the 1940s. The man was everywhere. The Oxbow Incident, 1943, placed him alongside Henry Fonda in an intense, morally charged Western drama exploring mob justice. Next came Wing and a Prayer, 1944, A Bell for Adano, 1945, State Fair, 1945, and Dragonwick, 1946, opposite cinematic titan Walter Houston. He was in The Gangster, 1947, The Big Clock, 1948, with Charles Laughton, The Well, 1951, and eventually landed roles in absolute classics like High Noon, 1952, with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly. Let's be real. If you're in High Noon, you're part of film canon. Add to that Torch Song, 1953, with Joan Crawford, and a slew of collaborations with director Anthony Mann and star James Stewart, Bend of the River, Thunder Bay, The Glenn Miller Story, The Far Country, and Strategic Air Command. And you start to see that Morgan wasn't just dabbling around the edges of Hollywood. He was basically weaving himself into the very fabric of mid-century American cinema. It's easy to overlook him if you don't know to look for him, but once you do, you see he's everywhere, shaping the scenes with that gentle, relatable presence. Fast forward through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, and you'll find Harry Morgan popping up in Inherit the Wind, 1960, with Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, a film still fiercely relevant as it explores the battle between scientific thought and societal norms. He portrayed Ulysses S. Grant in the all-star epic How the West Was Won, 1962, which found him sharing the screen with a pantheon of Western icons, including John Wayne. He even did comedic turns like John Goldfarb, Please Come Home, 1965, with Peter Ustinov, Frankie and Johnny, 1966, with Elvis Presley and Donna Douglas, and The Flim Flam Man, 1967, with George C. Scott. Somewhere in the midst of that storm of roles, he found time for comedic Western romps like Support Your Local Sheriff, 1969, and Support Your Local Gunfighter, 1971, with James Garner, and co-starred with John Wayne and Lauren Bacall in The Shootist, 1976, Wayne's final film. He even had a role in Dragnet, 1987, starring Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks. Honestly, the breadth of Morgan's filmography from the 1940s to the 1980s is astonishing. It's like he kept one foot in the golden age and the other in the modern comedic era, refusing to be pigeonholed or pegged as just one type of actor. Which brings us to one of the more interesting threads in the tapestry of Harry Morgan's career, his relationship with Jack Webb. If Jack Webb's name doesn't immediately ring a bell, think Dragnet, that iconic police procedural that shaped the way crime dramas were done for decades. Morgan and Webb first crossed paths in film noir territory with projects like Dark City, 1950, Appointment with Danger, 1951, and Pete Kelly's Blues, 1955. Morgan also found a slot in Webb's radio version of Dragnet, a production where Webb cultivated a tight-knit stock company of trusted actors. It's fascinating to think that Morgan, who would later become known for comedic gravitas, got some of his big breaks in the shadowy world of noir and strict procedural drama. But that's just the first taste of the synergy that would pay off dramatically later in Morgan's career. Harry also tried his hand at hosting duties. In 1947, he took the helm of an NBC radio series called Mystery in the Air, which featured the creepy brilliance of Peter Lorre. Over at CBS, Morgan played Pete Porter in Pete and Gladys from 1960 to 1962, with Cara Williams as Gladys. That show was a spin-off of December Bride, 1954 to 1959, in which Morgan had a popular recurring role. Already you see him developing a light comedic style that would come in handy for bigger comedic roles down the line. And if you want a wild cameo, check out a 1950 Dragnet radio episode titled The Big Boys, in which Morgan appears as a tipsy hotel clerk who can't quite keep his commentary to himself. By the early 1960s, Morgan found himself popping up on TV in all sorts of places. He guested on Going My Way, that ABC drama series starring Gene Kelly, loosely based on the 1944 Bing Crosby film, then took a turn playing the mobster Bugs Moran in an episode of The Untouchables. He even swung over to Have Gun Will Travel, playing Sheriff Ernie Backwater, before working as a regular on The Richard Boone Show in 1963 to 1964. In between, he co-starred in a short-lived NBC show called Kentucky Jones, 1964 to 1965, with Dennis Weaver. If you take a magnifying glass to TV in that era, you'll see Morgan's name sprinkled across countless shows, weaving in and out like a seasoned character actor who could pivot from drama to comedy in the blink of an eye. Then came the moment in 1967 that set the stage for one of Morgan's most recognized roles outside of MASH, Officer Bill Gannon in the rebooted Dragnet, which ran from 1967 to 1970. Suddenly he was the sidekick to Jack Webb's stoic Joe Friday, deadpan, unwavering, but with just enough comedic undercurrent to keep things lively. Dragnet soared as a cultural phenomenon, famous for its matter-of-fact style, and those classic lines like "just the facts, ma'am." Morgan's reliability shone through. He had a certain calm efficiency, but also an affable twinkle in his eye that made you feel safe, as though if you were ever in trouble, you'd want Bill Gannon on your side. He wasn't done collaborating with Jack Webb either. He popped up in The DA, 1971, and in Webb's Heck Ramsey, 1972 to 1974, showcasing even more range in the Western genre. If you wanted stability and skill on a show, Harry Morgan was your guy. There were also times Morgan stepped outside the lines for cameo or side roles, like his 4 appearances on Gunsmoke from 1970 to 1975, or a role in the 1971 television film Ellery Queen Don't Look Behind You, where he played Inspector Richard Queen. Audiences might not have realized it then, but they were witnessing the slow-build legacy of a man who would come to define the essence of a great character actor, always game, always convincing, and always adding that special something that made the show or film a little more memorable. Then, in 1974, lightning struck for Harry Morgan in the unlikeliest of ways. MASH was already an established phenomenon on television, a comedic and dramatic powerhouse set during the Korean War. Though everyone at home knew it was as much about the ongoing tensions of contemporary times as it was about historical conflict. Morgan was invited to guest star in an episode called The General Flipped at Dawn, playing Major General Bartford Hamilton Steele, who, let's just say, was mentally imbalanced in comedic proportions, and it was hilarious, unhinged, and captivating enough for the producers to decide that they wanted more of Morgan. Cue the departure of McLean Stevenson from the role of Henry Blake at the end of Season 3. The producers needed a new commanding officer who would strike just the right balance of authority, heart, and humor. Enter Colonel Sherman T. Potter at the start of Season 4, brought to life by Harry Morgan. This was a pivotal shift. Instead of just comedic chaos, Colonel Potter was a career military man who exuded competence, fatherly warmth, and an understated comedic timing that resonated deeply with the entire MASH ensemble. Fans latched onto his avuncular presence, the sly grin, and the moral center that Potter provided. He was the stable force in a sea of comedic misfits, the wise figure who could dish out fatherly advice one minute and deliver a hilarious one-liner the next. Perhaps it was that fatherliness that set him apart from Henry Blake's more bumbling approach. Potter was a different kind of leader, tough when needed, but always deeply caring. Morgan had found a role that was seemingly tailor-made for his blend of comedic timing, dramatic integrity, and real empathy. In 1980, Morgan's portrayal earned him an Emmy Award, a rightful accolade, to cement a career of unwavering dedication. When asked if working with such a talented group on MASH made him a better actor, he famously quipped that he wasn't sure about being a better actor, but it certainly made him a better human being. That's Harry Morgan, unpretentious, sincere, and keenly aware that entertainment is as much about forging human connections as it is about delivering lines. When MASH finally ended, he joined the short-lived spin-off After MASH, reprising Colonel Potter. Although After MASH never managed to capture the same lightning in a bottle, it extended Morgan's run as that beloved character just a little bit longer, offering fans a chance to see him again as the compassionate, gruff, but lovable army doctor. At the same time, don't forget he was also dabbling in the world of Disney. Throughout the 1970s, Morgan appeared in several Disney productions such as The Barefoot Executive, Snowball Express, Charlie and the Angel, The Apple Dumpling Gang, The Cat from Outer Space, opposite none other than McLean Stevenson, and The Apple Dumpling Gang Rides Again. Think of these as light, family-friendly romps that let Morgan lean into a comedic-style ideal for kids and parents alike. They were a far cry from the heavier moral lessons of MASH or the procedural tension of Dragnet, but they showed off that lively twinkle in his eye. As the 1980s marched on, Morgan continued exploring new territory. In 1986, he co-starred with Hal Linden in Black's Magic, where he played Leonard Black, a semi-retired con artist teaming up with a magician-turned-detective. The show only lasted one season, but for Morgan, it was another new challenge, another chance to show his comedic and dramatic adaptability. In 1987, he reprised Bill Gannon in a Dan Aykroyd-led film adaptation of Dragnet. This was a far more comedic, parody-driven take on the original, with Tom Hanks as Aykroyd's sidekick, but it was pure fun to see Morgan return as Gannon. this time at a higher rank, bridging the gap between the old-school seriousness of the 1950s-60s Dragnet era and the more self-aware comedic style of the 1980s. Around the same time, Morgan gave television comedy yet another shot with You Can't Take It With You, 1987 to 1988, playing Martin Vanderhoff in an adaptation of the classic Kaufman and Hart play. The show lasted only one season, but if you look at Morgan's body of work, these short-run programs form a mosaic of willingness. He wasn't the type to rest on his laurels or let one success define him. He was constantly stepping into new roles, new genres, and new comedic spaces. The 1990s saw Morgan teaming up with Walter Matthau in a series of CBS TV movies, including The Incident, An Incident in Baltimore, An Incident in a Small Town. He portrayed Stoddard Bell, a judge who was at times Matthau's friend and at times his nemesis, in a dynamic that felt partly comedic, partly dramatic, always rooted in the interplay of two seasoned veterans. That decade also brought a cameo in The Simpsons, where he amusingly voiced Bill Gannon again in the episode Mother Simpson. Imagine the synergy. Harry Shearer as Joe Friday, and the real Harry Morgan stepping back in as Gannon for a cameo. It's these bits of pop cultural cross-pollination that keep older fans smiling and younger audiences curious to learn more. Morgan also had a recurring role on Third Rock from the Sun as Professor Suter, Dick Solomon's colleague, blending right in with the show's zany comedic style. And though many fans never realized it, Morgan even took a turn behind the camera, directing episodes for various series. 2 episodes of The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, 2 episodes of Heck Ramsey, and 1 of Adam 12, among others. Small wonder that by the early 2000s, Harry Morgan was recognized for his Western work with an induction into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. Whether it was comedic sketches, dramatic arcs, or Western roles, Morgan's authenticity clearly resonated. Behind the Hollywood dazzle, however, real life kept marching on. In 1986, a year after his first wife passed away, Morgan married Barbara Bushman Quine. This relationship lasted until his death, though it wasn't without its challenges. In July of 1996, Morgan was arrested on domestic battery charges for striking Barbara, who was hospitalized. While the case was later dismissed after Morgan completed court-ordered anger management and domestic violence counseling, it's one of those more difficult chapters that complicates the narrative of a beloved star. We often prefer our Hollywood idols squeaky clean, but reality has a knack for intruding on that fantasy. Morgan's story was no exception. This doesn't negate his comedic brilliance or fatherly presence on screen, but it reminds us that real life isn't always as tidy as a scripted half-hour episode. After decades in the business, embodying roles from bumbling hotel clerks to paternal colonels, comedic sidekicks, and comedic leads, Harry Morgan passed away in his sleep on December 7th, 2011, at the age of 96. He had recently been treated for pneumonia, and his son Charles was the one to confirm the sad news. His remains were cremated and the ashes returned to family. In the following days, tributes and condolences poured in from fans, colleagues, and critics alike. One particularly heartfelt statement came from Mike Farrell, Morgan's co-star on MASH. Farrell called him a wonderful man, a fabulous actor, and a dear and close friend, praising his skill as a character actor who made everybody else shine a bit brighter. Farrell even recalled Morgan's modesty about working with the talented cast, pointing out that Morgan never saw himself as a great, even though to everyone else he most certainly was. And that's how we remember Harry Morgan today, A man who rarely hogged the spotlight in a brash or flamboyant way, but who nonetheless anchored countless scenes with a level of warmth, calm, and subtle hilarity that only he could deliver. He was a part of the old Hollywood system, stepping foot on big stages, forging friendships with icons like Glenn Miller, weaving in and out of film noirs, classic dramas, and comedic staples. From those early days in the group theater to the life-changing role of Colonel Potter, he carried with him that unassuming but unshakable presence. So the next time someone mentions Colonel Sherman T. Potter, or you hear that familiar dum-da-dum-dum from Dragnet, or you spot a cameo of Morgan in a black and white classic, remember there's a robust, layered story behind that soft-spoken exterior, one that travels from the hot spotlights of the group theater to the comedic brilliance of 1970s sitcoms, from the dusty sets of westerns to the big band swing of Glenn Miller. It's the story of a man whose career spanned the epics of modern American entertainment, capturing the hearts of multiple generations. Quietly, subtly, and always with a hint of humor, Harry Morgan demonstrated that being a steadfast, reliable force in a sea of bigger personalities can be its own kind of stardom. And that's precisely why, even in a constantly shifting pop culture landscape, his legacy remains as comforting and beloved as an old friend's voice on the other end of the line.